The Curse Under the Headlights. I, Clara Monroe, have always loved night drives. There's something about empty roads with only headlights cutting through the darkness that makes me feel free. I grew up in Connecticut, where rush hour traffic can turn a short trip into a nightmare that lasts for hours. So whenever I get the chance, I choose to drive while the world is asleep. My sister Emily lives in Savannah, Georgia, and a few times a year, I make the 15-hour drive to visit her. Flying would be faster, but I like bringing my car, especially when I plan to stay for a month. It gives me independence, so I don't have to rely on Emily to drive me around. One Wednesday morning at 2 a.m., I left my small home in the suburbs of Hartford. The streets were silent, the only sound being my engine in the chilly air. I stopped by a 24/7 coffee shop and bought a hot latte to stay awake for the long journey ahead. By the time I left Connecticut and entered New Jersey, it was past 3 a.m. Once I escaped the dense Northeast, the drive became easier. Just stick to I-95 heading south through endless stretches of land. I turned on the radio, letting soft melodies fill the car, and felt more at ease. But around 4 a.m., hunger began gnawing at me. I'd skipped breakfast before leaving. When I wake up that early, my stomach usually hasn't realized it needs food. I exited I-95 when I saw a sign for restaurants, and my eyes lit up when I spotted a familiar name, Burger King. I wasn't sure if it was open, but I decided to take my chances. The sign led me down dark, narrow roads, completely unlit. I felt like I was venturing into a deserted land, with my blue hatchback's headlights the only source of light, sweeping over dry bushes and muddy shoulders. When I reached the Burger King parking lot, I saw a few dim lights through the windows and a single vehicle, an old pickup truck, parked in the far corner. I pulled into the drive-through lane where the menu lit up with breakfast items. I stopped at the intercom, waiting for someone to greet me, but a minute passed with no response. Hello? I tried calling, but only the sound of wind whistling through the window replied. Frustrated, I pulled out my phone, quickly looked it up, and found that the place didn't open until 5:30 a.m. I sighed and was about to back out when three sharp knocks on the window made me jump. I turned to the right, heart pounding. A man stood just outside the window, his face partly hidden in the shadows, but I could still make out a faint smile on his lips. He motioned for me to roll the window down. I hesitated, unease rising in my chest, but I cracked the window just enough to hear. "This place isn't open yet," he said in a deep, even voice. "Yeah, I just found out," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. He pointed to the pickup truck in the corner. "I'm stuck. My battery died. Can you give me a jump?" He sounded pleading, his eyes glinting under my headlights. I glanced at the pickup. It was parked in a hidden spot near a thick line of trees, and the uneasy feeling grew stronger. But I've always believed in doing the right thing. If I left him, I'd feel guilty all day. "I don't have jumper cables," I said. He smiled wider. "Don't worry, I've got some in the trunk." I reluctantly nodded. "All right." He stepped back so I could drive over to the pickup. Since his truck was nose in, I did the same, positioning our front ends as close as possible. I shut off my engine, popped the hood, and got out. The air was biting cold, and the scent of damp earth from the nearby forest filled my nose. He opened his truck's hood, pulled out a red and black jumper cable, and began connecting the clamps. I restarted my engine, and we waited a minute before I told him to try his. He walked slowly to his truck, taking longer than I expected. When he turned the key, the engine gave only a weak clicking sound. We waited a few more minutes, and he tried again. Still nothing. I frowned. That was strange. If he had just driven here, the battery shouldn't be this dead. He got out, told me to hang on a second, then took out his phone and started speaking. In Portuguese, I guessed. His voice too quiet for me to hear clearly. I don't speak Portuguese, so I didn't try to understand. After the call, he returned and said his friend told him to wait a few more minutes and try one last time. "All right," I replied, but my patience was wearing thin. I wanted to keep driving. And standing in this dark parking lot was starting to make my skin crawl. Then, like a nightmare, the roar of two trucks echoed as they sped into the parking lot from opposite sides of the building. Their headlights were blinding, aimed straight at me. That's when it hit me. This was a trap. "Shit," I whispered, quickly unhooking the cables from my battery and slamming the hood shut. But it was too late. The two trucks blocked my car from behind, boxing me in. I looked at the man, his smile now twisted, his eyes cold as blades. It wasn't the pleading smile anymore. It was the triumphant grin of a predator. I felt the blood drain from my face. Without thinking, I locked my car with the remote and bolted into the forest next to the parking lot. Darkness swallowed me, branches scraping my legs and arms, thorns digging into my skin. I tripped, fell onto the damp ground, and immediately curled into a ball, trying to disappear into the brush. Shouts in Portuguese rang out in the distance, growing closer. I counted at least 3 voices, but couldn't tell if they were armed. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding so loud I feared they could hear it. I'd never been so scared. My life felt like it was hanging by a thread. Then the voices began to fade, and I felt a flicker of hope. But just as quickly, my car alarm blared from the parking lot, tearing through the night. I knew what that meant. All my belongings, suitcases full of clothes, shoes, jewelry, items worth thousands of dollars, were in the trunk and back seat. I bit my lip, holding back tears, and slowly crawled toward the parking lot, staying low to avoid being seen. At the edge of the woods, I peeked out. Only my car remained under the dim lights. The 3 other vehicles were gone. I ran to the car, and what I saw broke me. The rear window was shattered, glass scattered across the seats. The trunk had been forced open, and my suitcases were gone. The back seat was empty. Purse, coats, everything had been taken. I sat in the driver's seat, hands shaking, and began to cry. Stress, anger, helplessness, all of it crashed down at once. I called the police, my voice breaking as I told them everything. They arrived quickly, searched the area, but found no trace of them. They said they'd check the Burger King security footage once it opened, but I knew the odds of recovering my things were slim. The police let me go after taking my statement. I was still nearly 2 hours from home, so I turned around and drove back in a numb daze. It was the longest, heaviest drive of my life, each mile a reminder of my mistake. A few days later, the Jersey police contacted me, confirming that the pickup had fake plates and the 2 trucks didn't have plates at all. They promised to continue the investigation, but the officer's voice held little hope. My belongings, 80% of my wardrobe, keepsakes from Emily, irreplaceable things, were gone forever. I believe in karma, and I hope those men pay for what they did. But deep down, I blame myself for trusting too easily, for thinking that doing good always brings good in return. Now, every time I drive at night, I no longer feel free. I only see that man's eyes, his cruel smile haunting me like a curse that won't go away. Darkness on the highway. I, Owen Caldwell, have never minded long road trips. There's something about endless stretches of road, especially at night, that makes me feel like I'm drifting through a world of my own. I live in a small coastal town in North Carolina where life moves slowly and everyone knows each other's name. But a few times a year, I drive over 14 hours to visit my best friend Marcus in a remote rural area of Virginia. I prefer driving over flying. It gives me time to think, to absorb the peace that only empty roads can bring. That night, I was on one of those trips. It was close to midnight, and I was crossing a desolate part of South Carolina where cotton fields stretched out and disappeared into darkness. The I-95 highway was silent, with only the headlights of my gray SUV cutting through the night. I had been driving for nearly 10 hours, my body growing sore from sitting too long, and my bladder sending urgent signals I couldn't ignore. I knew I needed to stop, not just to use the bathroom, but to stretch my legs, breathe some fresh air, and maybe grab an energy drink from a vending machine, if I got lucky. I kept an eye out for rest area signs, and when the familiar green sign appeared in the glow of my headlights, it felt like finding an oasis in the desert. Rest area, 3 miles, it read. I slowed down, taking an exit that led to a small rest stop. It was a tiny place, nothing but a low cement building with 2 restrooms and a few old wooden benches outside. No trucks. These rest areas weren't made for them, but I noticed a black sedan parked in the far corner of the lot, its windows fogged over, making it impossible to see inside. I parked close to the restrooms, shut off the engine, and stretched a little, feeling the late-night cold seep through my jacket. As I walked toward the restroom, I glanced at the sedan. Maybe someone was sleeping in the car, I thought, but I didn't see any signs of life. I pushed open the door to the restroom, the dim fluorescent lights from the ceiling casting a pale glow over the grimy tile floor. And then I froze. In the corner of the room, a man stood motionless, his back to me, head bowed as if staring at the wall. I thought he was using the urinal, but then I realized he wasn't near any of them. He was simply facing the corner wall, like a statue. The sight was so bizarre, it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I hesitated, unsure if I should say something. Are you okay? Almost slipped out, but I held it in. Something felt off. I walked past him into a stall, trying to keep my composure even as my heart began to race. I closed the door, locked the latch, but honestly, I couldn't go. Not because I didn't need to, but because the silence in the room was so thick it was frightening. I stood there for about a minute, trying to focus, but I couldn't. Eventually, I flushed for show and opened the stall door. The man had turned around. He was still in the same spot, but now he was facing me, eyes wide and empty, staring straight at me. His face, God, I can't even describe it. Something was wrong. The area around his eyes was darkened, like shadows had clung to his skin. His expression wasn't angry or sad, just vacant, like a painting with the emotion erased. I had never encountered anyone who made me feel so unsettled. I had been alone on the road for over 10 hours, hadn't spoken to anyone, and now the weirdness of this moment nearly froze me in place. Instead of saying anything, I turned, walked quickly outside, trying not to run so I wouldn't show panic. I jumped into the car, started the engine, and backed out of the lot. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him, that man, stepping out of the restroom, walking steadily toward my car with unhurried steps. I hit the gas, barreling back onto the highway, my heart pounding. As the rest area disappeared from view, I exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. I still needed to pee, and the unease hadn't left me. I told myself to hold it a little longer. Surely there'd be another rest area within 20 minutes. I was right. About 18 minutes later, another sign appeared, and I turned into a rest area almost identical to the last. A small cement building with a few parking spots and not a soul around. There were no other cars in the lot, and I felt a bit more at ease. I parked right in front of the restroom, nearly jogged inside, and locked myself in a stall. This time, I took care of business quickly, feeling like I just unloaded a ton of weight. But as I was washing my hands, I heard footsteps, slow, steady, entering the room. I held my breath, waiting. I expected them to stop at a urinal or another stall, but they didn't. The footsteps came straight to my stall and stopped right in front of the door. Through the gap under the door, I saw a pair of old leather shoes, toes pointing directly at me. My heart pounded so loudly, I feared they might hear it. The first and scariest thought was that the man from the previous rest stop had followed me. How did he know I was here? I hadn't seen any cars on the road, no headlights following me. Anxiety left me speechless, but I knew I had to do something. I mustered all my courage and shouted, "Someone's in here!" No response. Not a sound, not a word. That silence was more terrifying than any answer. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and put it on speaker. The operator's voice came through clearly. 911, what's your emergency? I spoke loudly, trying to keep my voice calm but sharp. I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened. I answered the operator's questions, location, rest area description, loudly enough to send a message to whoever was standing outside. You hear that? I said, as if speaking directly to him. And then, like a miracle, I heard the shoes pivot, footsteps walking away from the room. I whispered to the operator that he had left, but I didn't dare leave the stall. I'll wait for the police, I said, and she agreed that was a good idea. 15 minutes later, a knock came on the door, followed by a voice. Police here. It's safe now. You can come out. I opened the door, stepped out on shaky legs, and recounted everything. The strange man at the first rest area, the vacant eyes, and the terrifying moment when the shoes appeared outside the stall door. I described the black sedan, though I couldn't recall the license plate. The officer checked my car to make sure it hadn't been tampered with, then walked around the rest area, but found nothing unusual. Maybe he just wanted to scare you, he said, though his tone wasn't very confident. We left the rest area at the same time, and I felt a bit more secure seeing the patrol car following for a few miles before turning off. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I was almost certain the man at the second rest stop was the same one from before. How did he find me? I didn't see any cars following, no signs on the road. As a man, I always thought things like this only happened to women, but that night taught me that the darkness doesn't discriminate. I arrived at Marcus's house the next morning, exhausted but safe. I told him the story, and his eyes widened as he advised me to get a dash cam for future trips. I still drive at night, but now, whenever I see a rest area appear in the darkness, I no longer feel relief. I only see those empty eyes and hear the footsteps stopping outside the stall door. A reminder that the dark always holds something no one expects. Let me know if you want to turn this into a formatted short story PDF, add images, or anything else.